Straight ahead on CBS News, up to the minute, unfit for man or beast. Everyone's fighting the forecast from the Mississippi East.
And back from the Far East, President Clinton's solemn vacation.
Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Troy Roberts.
And I'm Monica Gale. Thanks for joining us this morning. More stagnant weather on this day 6 of the East Coast heat wave that has now claimed at least 48 lives. In the Midwest, there's no break from the flooding that has now left 250,000 people with no fresh water to drink. CBS News correspondent Scott Pelley begins our flood coverage.
The flood is being called the worst disaster in Iowa history. West Des Moines inundated by the Des Moines River. And in the midst of the flood of the century, residents are desperate for water.
I have no water at home that's drinkable. And they said basically the water's going to be out for at least a week.
The city's water treatment plant was overwhelmed, shutting off water to 5 communities. By morning, bottled water was running out.
I have about 5 pails at home, but I can't drink it.
I have to take a lot of medication, so I need water to take it with.
Water is now coming in by truck. They expect to have enough, but residents will have to boil it or carry it home in bottles for at least several days, maybe more than a week. All along the river, some flooded factories are closing. 500 workers are being laid off from this St. Louis air conditioning plant.
This could set us back. If we lose a lot of production, we can be set back for a while, and we just can't afford it at this time.
Farther south, residents of St. Genevieve, Missouri are working to save history. The entire town is an historic site with 200-year-old French colonial buildings. The water is inches from the top of the emergency levee.
Our parents live a block away, and we're keeping it from going to their house. So my sister's come in from Joplin, and we all came to help.
Here's an idea just how hard these people are working. In one 24-hour period here in St. Genevieve, these folks lifted, loaded, and placed more than 90,000 sandbags. Part of St. Genevieve's history is already flooded, and now the town is making its last stand.
Forecasters say the East Coast has one more day to bake before breaking this heat and humidity. Temperatures stayed out of the triple digits yesterday, but hit the high 90s just about everywhere from Georgia to Maine. Things weren't much cooler at the beaches, but thousands of people went looking for a break anyway. Senior citizens in Philadelphia, where officials say at least 41 people have died in the heat, were served frozen yogurt to help keep them cool. Heavy use of fans and air conditioners caused sporadic power outages across the heat-stricken area over the weekend. The head of the National Weather Service says the nation's weather pattern is returning to normal this week, and as for where to lay the blame for the past several weeks, he says it could be El Nino.
We believe that the patterns that we have seen here over the past few weeks are associated with the overall global atmospheric circulation that's heavily controlled by the Pacific Ocean. And we believe that we're beginning to see some indication of how to tie these together to make seasonal forecast and projections. But the fact is, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Rain is expected to continue today along the Mississippi, but end by Wednesday. Rain is also expected to help cool things off on the East Coast by sometime tomorrow. Vice President Al Gore says he'll be in St. Louis to check out the flooding later today.
Dry, pleasant weather in Colorado, and that's a problem for firefighters on the scene of a brush fire that happens to be in the same place as the largest fire in that state's history. Darren Duarte has that story.
Brush fires are always headaches for firefighters, but this one in Moffat County made for some anxious moments.
It was moving towards the residences yesterday afternoon, and then again last night about 11 o'clock. A fire did kick up along the north side, and we ended up diverting about half the resources on the fire back over to protect that residence.
It turns out residents had nothing to worry about. The wind shifted the blaze away from homes and other structures. Firefighters thought they had a handle on things.
Looks like we got that one, huh?
But by afternoon, Mother Nature changed that. Strong winds rekindled sparks on the ground, and flames sprang up again. Another 1,000 acres gone. Property damage to homes, not a concern this time.
I'd say luck played in it in terms of the wind shifts. It didn't help in terms of overall suppression. We lost a lot more acres, but the wind shifts did pull it away from the structures.
That's the best firefighters can hope for. This land is damaged, but it's been hurt by fire before. More than 15,000 acres burned in 1988. Lightning was to blame for that one, and a sign is posted as a reminder. The cause of this fire is under investigation, but fire officials believe it may have been deliberately set. Darren Duarte for CBS News, Moffat County, Colorado.
Back on American soil, after a week in the Far East, President Clinton is taking a few days off in Hawaii. He and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton were greeted in Honolulu by their daughter Chelsea, who had not gone with them to Tokyo and South Korea. She placed the traditional lei greeting around her parents' neck. The Clintons looked fresh from their trip. They had flown overnight from Seoul and told reporters they got 5.5 hours of, quote, hard sleep aboard Air Force One. Immediately after landing, the president had breakfast with troops at Pearl Harbor, then took a launch to the USS Arizona Memorial. He and the First Lady placed a wreath on the memorial. Then, with taps playing in the background, they threw their leis into the water where the Arizona rests. And the president talked about how much has changed since 1941.
To be economically and physically secure, we must continue to be strong. In visits to Japan and to Korea, I have reaffirmed the commitment of the United States to the security of our allies and friends in the Pacific, beginning with a continuing military presence made possible by the men and women who serve our nation here at Pearl Harbor and throughout the region.
The president will remain in Hawaii until Wednesday and then return to Washington.
When it was still Sunday in Korea, the president ventured to within feet of North Korea. He visited with soldiers at the heavily fortified demilitarized zone separating the pro-Western South Korea from its arch-rival to the north. The president surveyed the area and told troops that someday this will all be one country again. 10 demonstrators are reported hospitalized after hundreds of students clashed with riot police during an anti-U.S. protest in Seoul. It happened as the president was leaving South Korea. There were no reports of arrests. The students were demanding the withdrawal of U.S. troops from their country.
UN weapons inspectors have withdrawn from Iraq in a hurry. They say the government has refused to let them do their work. The move has Baghdad appealing to the United Nations not to act hastily. But as the inspectors rushed out of the capital city, Iraq's foreign minister sounded as if he expected a missile attack at any moment. The inspectors moved out after Iraqi officials refused to allow the sealing off of 2 missile test sites.
And in just a moment, assessing the G7 summit, the Russian perspective.
And on the heels of the summit, another review of Japan's favorite American. The UN High Commission for Refugees says the aid operation in Bosnia has reached a crisis point, and an emergency meeting will convene in Geneva later this week to discuss the problem. A recent group of refugees made it to safety recently with the help of British troops in Bosnia, but their plight is not over. Britain Sky News correspondent Jeff Mead is in central Bosnia.
British Army trucks cross the front line near Turbe in central Bosnia on board a cargo of human misery. They're the first of over 600 mainly Muslim civilians whose communities around the town of Doboj are now being ethnically cleared by the controlling Serb forces.
This started 2 months ago when the Serbs began systematically raping, killing, looting. They asked us if we wanted to leave. Well, we just had enough.
First stop for the exhausted and bewildered families is a former school in Travnik that served as a reception centre and temporary home for 60,000 such dispossessed in more than a year of war. Now, though, as the fighting encroaches further into the Muslim areas, it offers no safety. The previous night, up to 7 people were reported killed and 17 injured when artillery shells plunged through the roof of the gymnasium being used as a dormitory. For the newcomers, anyway, it's only a temporary halt, for the school has neither room nor supplies for them.
As far as food is concerned, we're in a desperate state. We only have enough for another 7 days, and as you can see, more refugees are arriving all the time.
The only help available here is another journey by lorries to an outlying village, where they'll be farmed out to local families to sleep 10 or more to a room. The irony is these are country people, farmers and land workers. Had they been allowed to stay in their village, they could have fed themselves and others. As it is, they've just become another burden on a refugee system about to break down. For food aid from the outside world is now being seen as a weapon by all sides. This Muslim-run depot at GENEVIEVE's been attacked twice in as many days. Roadblocks springing up overnight make relief convoy route planning impossible, and gunmen are no respecters of the UNHCR's white vehicles. If the biggest official aid organisation does break down, then smaller volunteer groups will be left even more vulnerable to those who'd pirate supplies as scarcity pushed up the price. The UNHCR say supplies can last only for another 3 weeks, and already the increase in fighting's drastically cutting the amount that's being delivered. The country needs 1,300 tons every 24 hours. These days, less than half that amount's getting through. Jeff Mead for CBS News, Central Bosnia.
CBS News Up to the Minute goes global now to check other international stories making headlines. More Russians will get to see MTV. Hundreds of Muscovites turned out over the weekend to celebrate the rock music television channel's expansion in that country. Until this weekend, MTV was only available to those who could afford satellite dishes. Now it'll be broadcast on 3 Russian channels 43 hours a week. 3 men were seriously injured during the 5th bull run in the northern Spanish city of Pamplona. Hospital officials say 1 man was gored in the chest and another in the back as the animals charged through the narrow streets on their way to the bull ring. A 3rd man was hospitalized with head injuries after being trampled in the crush. He is in intensive care. More than 60 others were treated for minor injuries after Sunday's bull run. For a brief time Sunday, some Croatians forgot about the raging civil war in the former Yugoslavia and remembered happier times. It was opening night of the 44th annual Summer Music Festival in Dubrovnik. Hundreds listened to music and enjoyed watching the dancers perform in their colorful costumes. Most observers would agree that President Clinton scored a fairly big hit with the Japanese public last week, working the crowds and taking his message directly to the people, campaign style. But once again, someone very close to him was even a bigger hit with the Japanese, and she has been the talk of Tokyo. CBS News correspondent Dan Rather reports.
I admire her very much.
Very beautiful.
I think that she is really smart.
She's doing her own work, which is very important.
In Japan, they now call her Super Lady. And though Hillary Clinton tried to stay out of the spotlight, to stick to the program set for spouses, Japanese women were hungry for their first good look at the career woman First Lady from America.
I was very impressed by her youth. It was so fresh. And then which is something that we are missing in our politics.
There's no question that there's been a special fascination with Hillary Rodham Clinton in Japan, an extraordinary curiosity. But at least until she got here, rightly or wrongly, her reputation in this country could best be summed up in one word: aggressive.
She's a bit nosy in Mr. President's policies.
She is viewed as somebody who's very powerful, maybe over-powerful and strong.
The President and Mrs. Clinton's all things are equal partnership takes a lot of getting used to in a country such as this, where political wives stay 3 steps behind.
What do you yourself think of her as your political partner?
Mr. Clinton gives his wife a lot of credit, but what is seen as self-effacing in the U.S. is simple loss of face in Japan.
My wife is a lawyer. We're both lawyers, and most people who know us think that she is the real lawyer in our family.
It's just astonishing to accept that and to say that to the whole world.
But to the women fighting Japan's entrenched male-dominated political system, it's liberating.
We have natural resources, that is women.
A sign that Japan doesn't have to rank near the bottom of countries with women in government.
Among 130 countries, Japan is 110th. And I think 111 is Mongolia.
This may be the most that working women in Japan can hope to accomplish. Promotions are rare. Only 7% make it into management. From the golf course to flight attendant school, women are taught exactly how to bow, how to support the system.
Way up and out and down
That is starting to change at least a little. Young women like Tomiko Kage want to borrow a page from the Hillary Rodham Clinton Guide to Success.
She has a lot of responsibility, and I think that she's doing a great job. I don't think she's letting anything stop her.
It's a lesson in hope, says Hiroko Nakamura, Japan's premier pianist.
She gave a great hope to young people that if you have ability, if you are gifted, you'll be able to achieve something.
Dan Rather reporting for CBS News.
We'll be back after this.
You're watching CBS News, up to the minute.
Celebrating birthdays on this Monday, July 12th, comedian Milton Berle is 85.
Artist Andrew Wyeth turns 76.
Pianist Van Cliburn is 59.
Comedian Bill Cosby turns 56.
Richard Simmons is 45.
And Olympic gold medal figure skater Kristi Yamaguchi is 22. Checking the up-to-the-minute weather forecast for this Monday, some rain is expected in parts of the Midwest today. Showers also in the upper plain states. Thunderstorms will be scattered throughout the Southwest and in the Gulf Coast states. Rain also in the picture for the Northeast, but most of the West Coast remains dry. 100-degree weather persists in the Southwest. Expect a high of 104 in Las Vegas today. 90s throughout the southern portion of the country. 94 the forecast high for Charlotte, North Carolina, and Houston. A break in the heat wave in the Northeast. Highs in the 80s there today. 80-degree weather also in parts of the Midwest. Should reach 88 in New York City. The temperature should climb to 83 in Chicago. 60s and 70s in the Plain States. 70 the forecast high for Helena, Montana, and Bismarck, North Dakota. Should get up to 69 degrees.
In up-to-the-minute sports, a sore shoulder might have ended this golf season for Jack Nicklaus, but he decided to play one more week at the U.S. Senior Open. Now his shoulder isn't hurting as much. Nicklaus fell behind Tom Weiskopf by a stroke after Weiskopf birdied 5 of the first 8 holes. Nicklaus used his approach on the 7th hole to set up a birdie. Then Weiskopf missed a par putt and fell behind with a bogey on 15. On the 16th, Jack rolled in a 12-foot putt for a birdie and a one-stroke lead. It held up when Nicklaus parred the final hole to win his 18th major title and first win of any kind since taking the U.S. Senior Open 2 years ago. Now let's take a look at the scoreboard.
Princess Diana is in Zimbabwe this morning. She's on a 4-day visit to the African nation. This weekend, she met with AIDS patients and visited a hostel for lepers. Simon McCoy reports.
Welcome to good afternoon.
Johanna Scott wants to be adopted by the princess. Under a Help the Aged Adopt a Granny scheme, most of the residents at this Harare Old People's Home already have British benefactors. The 83-year-old wants Diana to pay the £120 a year to adopt her. Penniless and many without families, the elderly depend on charities for help. And whilst not guaranteeing to adopt any of them, the Princess of Wales was anxious to see what more can be done. A game of drafts in Zimbabwe's winter sun gave her the opportunity to find out, until it became clear she was losing.
I think we ought to retire gracefully.
But it was too late, and in front of the cameras, the princess was beaten. She avoided going into a huff. Through the Red Cross, the Princess of Wales saw how Zimbabwe is tackling its AIDS epidemic.
She's learnt a great deal about the international side of the work over the last couple of years, and shows a genuine interest and obviously a much better knowledge now than she had 2 or 3 years ago of our work. We were briefing her yesterday, and she was asking some very penetrating questions of the Red Cross people who were briefing her from the Zimbabwe Red Cross.
And the touch, which African doctors hope will help to dispel the myth and stigma surrounding leprosy, as the Princess of Wales joined in the Leprosy Mission's rehabilitation programme. Thoughts of home were never far away, and the Princess was presented with 2 gifts to take home to Princes William and Harry. Kensington Palace will never be the same again. Simon McCoy, Sky News for CBS.
That's it for this half hour.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
Experience CBS News.
Ahead on CBS News, up to the minute, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. People in Des Moines are without water as the muddy Mississippi surrounds the city, contaminating supplies.
And President Clinton back on American soil and bolstering his image as Commander-in-Chief of the nation's armed forces. Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Monica Gale.
And I'm Troy Roberts. Des Moines, Iowa is the picture of irony this morning. A city surrounded by water where drinking water is being rationed.
Iowa Governor Terry Branstad is doubling the number of National Guard troops and has recruited the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to haul drinking water to a city of 250,000 people. This morning, people in Des Moines, like many along the Mississippi, begin a difficult week dealing with a devastating flood. Reporter Scott Reynolds has more from Des Moines.
All the flooding of the farmland to the north finally took its toll on the state's biggest city as well. The raging Raccoon River busted a levee in West Des Moines and blasted past its banks.
We're just going to unload. We're just going to drop it. That's all right.
A monumental effort by volunteers saved the West Des Moines water treatment plant, preserving a clean supply of water for hospitals in downtown Des Moines, where the water is contaminated. Nearby cities have brought in thousands of gallons of drinking water. You had to wait in line to get yours. At least 45,000 residents have lost their electricity, and many know they'll lose their homes.
It's like losing a child or your husband or something. The thought of losing what we've built, it's just unbelievable.
We're moving everything completely out of our house, the whole thing, everything, because we might not be able to come back.
While some managed to save their belongings, others didn't get enough warning to drive away. The kind of flooding many believe would only hit once in 100 years had arrived. Most of the Metro buses made it to higher ground, but none of them will run their routes tomorrow. And nobody will be running the bases at the minor league stadium anytime soon. Some didn't want to wait for the waters to recede to assess the damage. Others couldn't even get together on this Sunday to pray that the rains will stop. And many downtown businesses will be closed today, although the state offices will remain open. Famous federal officials have been visiting the Midwest over the past couple of weeks to assess flood damage. Iowa gets its visit later today from Vice President Al Gore. But Monica, he will witness an incredible amount of damage that wasn't here just a couple of days ago when he scheduled this visit.
Scott, any idea when things might start to return to normal there?
Well, they do say that it could be a week, even 2 weeks, before the 250,000 residents here have clean drinking water again, and downtown businesses could be shut down for at least a week. They're not actually sure if the waters have crested here because of all the flooding to the north.
That is bad news. Scott Reynolds in Des Moines, Iowa, thanks for being with us here on Up to the Minute.
And in the east, the oppressive heat is still lingering. Weather forecasters are calling for some relief, possibly as early as tomorrow. It's been miserable overall and deadly for some. CBS News correspondent Linda Tyra has more.
On Sunday, there was no rest for those weary of the heat wave of 93. Cities throughout the east continue to roast in triple-digit temperatures. In the Delaware Valley alone, which includes Philadelphia, health officials report 24 people so far have died because of the heat. Authorities fear that number will climb much higher before the week is over.
The bodies are piling up in the medical examiner's office.
Philadelphia's health commissioner says most of the deaths have been among the elderly.
We think that there are 70,000 elderly who live alone in the city of Philadelphia. Which of them need help? Which of them are at risk? We don't have a central list, and we just don't know how to find them.
One of the most tragic heat-related deaths in this area has been that of a 4-year-old boy who died after he accidentally locked himself inside a hot parked car. It's a warning to parents. Children also have to be watched closely. A lot of kids are resorting to the time-honored summer tradition of opening fire hydrants. It may look like a cool idea, but it really isn't.
We've had calls from hospitals saying they don't have any water, calls from homes without water, calls from nursing homes without water. It's just extremely dangerous.
Another problem is air quality. The massive hot air trapped over big cities is making an already bad problem worse.
We believe that the patterns that we have seen here over the past few weeks are associated with the overall global atmospheric circulation that's heavily controlled by the Pacific Ocean.
The best that can be said is the end of the heat wave is coming, but it just won't be soon enough for millions of people suffering through the hottest summer in years. Linda Tyra, CBS News, Philadelphia.
In other news, UN weapons inspectors packed up and left Baghdad on Sunday. That after Iraq barred the team from sealing missile test sites. The UN team tried to gain access to the sites, but were confronted by Iraqi organized demonstrators. The inspection team had instructions to put seals on the missile sites after the Iraqis had refused to allow monitoring equipment to be installed. Vice President Al Gore says the UN resolutions will be complied with, quote, one way or another.
President Clinton is back in the States, wrapping up his Asian trip with a stop in Hawaii and a few days of R&R. It was as commander-in-chief that the president, who didn't serve in the military, stood over one of the military's most sacred of places. CBS News correspondent Bill Plant has more.
When he returned to the United States, just as he had earlier in Korea, Mr. Clinton went out of his way to reach out to the military, stopping for breakfast in an enlisted mess hall.
I talked to them about their lives here, about their duties. Thank them for their service to our country.
Then a solemn visit to Pearl Harbor and the USS Arizona, the memorial to more than 1,100 sailors who died in the Japanese attack here 52 years ago. The president's message: to remain secure, the U.S. must remain strong.
Our closest friends now are those with whom we fought a half a century ago. And yet it is still as clear now as it was then that the United States cannot disengage from the world.
That is intended to reassure America's Pacific allies and also to reassure the U.S. military. At a time when he's cutting the military budget, Mr. Clinton needs all the friends in uniform that he can get. And this coming week is when the report from the Pentagon on Mr. Clinton's proposal to end the ban on gays in the military is due. And the odds are that whatever the president decides, neither the military nor the gay community is going to wind up happy. Bill Plant, CBS News.
We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're watching CBS News Up to the Minute. Back in 1853, U.S. Navy Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Tokyo Bay. His mission, to open Japan as a trading partner with the West.
President Clinton arrived in Japan last week, 140 years later, with that same goal.
CBS News correspondent David Culhane reports on the issue at hand for Americans, the trade imbalance.
We have a huge and persistent trade deficit with Japan. It usually exceeds $40 billion, with the deficit in manufacturing products in excess of $60 billion.
All week long, halfway around the world in Japan, the American president was attempting a dialogue about trade.
It is clear that our markets are more open to your products and your investments than yours are to ours.
He was not concerned with abstractions. He was talking about electronics workers in California and Massachusetts. He was talking about automobile workers in the Midwest. People making bumpers in Danville, Illinois, and engine bearings in Greenville, Michigan. People who have found it extremely difficult to sell to Japan. Manufacturer Dennis Gormley.
I think there are many manufacturers in the United States that have the capability to supply on an equal basis, or in many cases better basis, than their current Japanese suppliers. It is a change in doing business. It's a change that that has to happen. They cannot expect to enjoy the participation in this market without also contributing something back into the marketplace.
Japan is essentially taking jobs and production away from other countries, exporting unemployment to the rest of the world.
Economist C. Fred Bergston estimates that for many years, Japanese trade barriers have been stopping anywhere from $9 to $18 billion a year in American exports.
The rule of thumb is that $1 billion of exports creates about 20,000 U.S. jobs. So Japan's barriers are blocking something like 200,000 to 400,000 U.S. jobs, many of them in high-wage manufacturing positions.
Bergston worked in the Nixon White House and the Carter Treasury Department. The title of his new book on Japanese-American relations is in the form of a question. Reconcilable differences?
The end of the Cold War has made a fundamental change in the U.S.-Japan relationship. Now everybody is focused on the economic dimension. The U.S. is going to take a much tougher line. Japan is going to have to respond not just to maintain its economic ties with the United States, but to retain its overall political relationship and friendly posture as a whole.
That tougher American line was evident in Tokyo, both in the negotiations and in an unprecedented move by President Clinton to take his case directly to the Japanese people.
This persistent trade imbalance has not just hurt American workers and businesses, it has hurt the Japanese people. The average Japanese family pays more than twice as much of your income for food as the average American family. And many other consumer products are far, far more expensive here than elsewhere.
The Japanese government agrees that the trade imbalance should be corrected, but not under duress, not with the specific numerical goals that the United States wants.
Japan has now escalated the dispute, appealing to other Asian nations to help head off the new American drive for measurable progress to open Japanese markets. The argument, these nations will be the next to feel American pressure.
Japan has gone around to various countries and made that case. I think that the truth is it will be hard for them to be successful because...
Laura D'Andrea Tyson, chair of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors, is one of the authors of the administration's plan to negotiate more aggressively with Japan over the next several years.
Japan's other trading partners, including Korea, have complaints about market access in Japan, have complaints about the control of technology going out of Japan. And I think they recognize the same sorts of barriers or problems that we recognize.
For years, the Federal Mogul Corporation tried unsuccessfully to break into the Japanese automobile parts market, a major area of contention where the American trade deficit is over $10 billion. Federal Mogul had great success selling engine bearings and oil seals in the rest of the world. Finally, the Japanese door opened a crack. CEO Dennis Gormley.
Today, through an extensive amount of effort, both here in the domestic arena as well as in Japan, we have managed to obtain $600,000 worth of business this year.
It is still less than 1% of his total business, but it is a foot in the door. Why did the Japanese finally decide to buy American?
I don't think there's any question the political pressure that the Japanese feel, driven by the trade deficit, has caused them to focus in on trying to do business with more domestic U.S. or I might even say global manufacturers.
The clearest demonstration of what we consider anti-competitive or discriminatory Japanese practices is the fact that their car makers will move to the U.S. and then bring their parts makers to the U.S. with them.
Lee Kadrich of the Automotive Parts and Accessories Association acknowledges that Japan has set a broad general goal to buy $19 billion more in American-made auto parts. But he is deeply skeptical of the end result.
It will bypass world-class competitive U.S. suppliers and pay a penalty in terms of a higher cost for the parts that they will buy from the Japanese suppliers.
The Japanese say they are increasing their purchases of American-made auto parts, but they say it takes time and a willingness by American manufacturers to make changes for greater efficiency. For years, Shad Khan tried without success to sell his truck bumpers to the Japanese. Then he signaled his readiness to make changes.
So about 3 years ago, we got a consultant from Toyota to come and stay with us for about 3 weeks and study our operation and really make suggestions to change our plants to basically a Toyota production system operation. It really cleaned up the plant, made it more organized. Our productivity just about doubled.
And his sales to the Japanese went from 0 to 65% of his production. But what happened at Shad Khan's Bumper Works is still the exception. And the United States Congress is already talking about retaliation against Japan unless there are concrete results.
What we've seen so far is only the beginning of U.S.-Japan economic negotiations of a very intense type. It'll be slowed down for a while by this uncertain political situation in Japan.
Economist Fred Bergston.
There are trillions of dollars worth of financial interaction, which, if disrupted by a trade war, could be devastating to interest rate levels, economic growth, investment as a whole. The stakes are very high for resolving these problems in a cooperative and constructive way.
After marathon all-night talks, Japan and the United States set the ground rules for a new series of negotiations on specific areas, like auto parts, to achieve a significant reduction of the trade gap. White House economist Laura Tyson.
We're looking at a long-term, long-range problem. It's better to get a really good agreement with the Japanese rather than a quick one. So if we have to wait a little while through this process, it's both understandable and it's also sensible.
Our two nations account for nearly 40% of the world's output. Neither of us could thrive without the other.
David Culhane, CBS News, New York.
We'll be back after this.
Stay with us. You're watching CBS News, Up to the Minute. Time now for a check of the weather on this Monday morning. The storm system that has been hovering over the Midwest is slowly moving east, but showers are still expected in parts of the nation's midsection today. Thunderstorms will also be scattered across the southwest, and storms are expected in parts of the northeast. 100-degree weather persists in the southwestern part of the country, but it will be cooler in the upper plains states with highs in the 60s.
Now let's take a look at the scoreboard. Baseball's All-Star Game will be played in Baltimore on Tuesday. This is usually the time when fans start watching the pennant races in earnest. But as CBS News correspondent Bill Geist reports, some fans in New York are just watching in disbelief.
Here at Shea Stadium, home of the Mets, they're absolutely thrilled about the three-day All-Star break. It means the Mets can't lose another game until Thursday. The last place Mets are posting a losing record of historic proportion. Pitcher Anthony Young has lost 26 straight games, an all-time record.
2 runs will score. Schneider.
He couldn't have done it on his own. He has a lot of people to thank. The Mets have done it on the field and off the field, the front office making monumentally bad trades of players like Lenny Dykstra, Darryl Strawberry, Greg Jeffries, Kevin Mitchell. The list goes on and on. The Mets are getting back to their roots, threatening the place in history held by the infamous 1962 Mets, by all accounts one of the worst teams in all of baseball history. The 62 Mets record of 40 wins and 120 losses could be in jeopardy this year.
Well, they're kind of working on our record now.
The leader of the 62 Mets was the accident-prone Marv Throneberry. Marvelous Marv, now 59 and living near Memphis, a New York folk hero. Does he think the 93 Mets have what it takes to be even worse?
I don't think so. I'd be very disappointed if they did. Their pitching was so much superb to the pitching that we had. I think they're going to come out of it.
But Marv contends that he and his 62 Mets would not be so well remembered had they been merely mediocre.
You know, a lot of them say you got a bad rep for what you did, but I say that all of that went on. It made me a lot of money later in life.
Based on his ineptitude, Marvelous Marv even became a star of TV commercials.
You know, I'm kind of worried, because if I do for light beer what I did for baseball, I'm afraid their sales might go down.
So Anthony Young and the 93 Mets should take heart. Being really bad can be all to the good. The Mets can always do product endorsements for candy, for poultry products. And the 93 Mets can always endorse weight loss products. No one loses so much so fast.
There's a looper in the center field. It drops in. 1 run will score. Here comes another run.
Poor Mets, huh?
Yeah, poor Mets. That does it for this half hour. Thanks for being with us.
This is CBS News, Up to the Minute.
CBS News.
Now on CBS News, up to the minute, the wrath of Mother Nature continues in the Midwest.
And an alleged defiance again by Saddam Hussein sends UN officials packing. From CBS News in New York, this is CBS News Up to the Minute. I'm Troy Roberts.
And I'm Monica Gale. Thanks for joining us this Monday morning. The summer of '93 is quickly becoming the summer of misery in the Midwest. Floodwaters are still rising throughout Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa, cascading over levees and flooding homes, farms, and businesses. In Des Moines, one of the hardest hit areas, baseball will be an underwater sport for a long time. From the air, you can clearly see there is mud and water where infielders and outfielders normally take their positions at the home of a Chicago Cubs farm team. The people of the city, though, have a much bigger crisis to cope with right now. The Raccoon River surged up and into the city's water plant over the weekend, and now everyone is scrambling for bottled water to drink and use for cooking. Martin Augustine reports.
Long lines of people needing water is exactly what planners expected. And as the water poured out, so did some tense emotions.
He needs to bring the truck around here. Now, please.
Those emotions are what water emergency planners, made up of local officials, are trying to cool when water trucks arrive.
There's no reason when you see these vehicles bringing the water that we have to have anybody pushing and shoving for water.
That hope has in large part been fulfilled. Water lines dropped off into the evening hours, and with that, any apprehension about being left out of the water line.
They've all been very cooperative, just appreciative of what we can do for them.
But for the thousands of people filling up, the task of traveling for a commodity normally taken for granted does get to be a grind.
I have 2 children, and it's quite an inconvenience, actually. We can't go to the restroom, can't do dishes, so we're buying paper plates.
The drinking water really isn't that big a problem. It's water for other purposes that I'm worried about.
But assurances have been made that plenty of water will be available as long as it takes to get through the flood of 1993. Martin Augustine for CBS News, Des Moines, Iowa.
Vice President Al Gore is expected to tour St. Louis later today. Forecasters are expecting heavy rain in the upper Midwest until tomorrow and then a change in the weather. But they say so much rain has already fallen, flooding may continue until the end of the summer.
To the east, along the Atlantic, forecasters are predicting at least one more day of oppressive heat and humidity. So far, more than 36 people have died in Philadelphia from heat-related causes. Officials say many of the victims were sick senior citizens living without air conditioning. Deaths were also reported in New York City, New Jersey, and New Hampshire.
In other news, the Clintons are taking in the summer sun of Hawaii for a few days. After a breakfast with U.S. soldiers at Pearl Harbor yesterday, the president set out for the USS Arizona Memorial. There, the first couple placed a wreath and tossed their leis into the water in memory of those who were killed when the Japanese sunk the Arizona in December 1941, pulling America into World War II. Later, the president reflected on the role of the U.S. military around the world.
Our closest friends now are those with whom we fought a half a century ago. And yet it is still as clear now as it was then that the United States cannot disengage from the world. To be economically and physically secure, we must continue to be strong. In visits to Japan and to Korea, I have reaffirmed the commitment of the United States to the security of our allies and friends in the Pacific.
Also in the news this morning, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein appears to be setting the stage for another confrontation with the United Nations. Sunday, UN weapons inspectors abruptly left Iraq after Baghdad blocked them from sealing 2 missile test sites. As CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips reports, the ball is now in the UN's court.
The United Nations inspectors had arrived in Baghdad with instructions to place seals on disputed rocket testing equipment after the Iraqis had refused to allow monitoring cameras to be installed. And so they headed out to try to do that.
I'm going out on an inspection.
As the Iraqis organized convenient anti-UN demonstrations, they refused to allow the rocket testing equipment to be sealed, instead suggesting that it be moved. The UN inspectors, with no mandate to negotiate, moved themselves right out of the country.
We left Baghdad because the Iraqis did not allow us to seal the equipment. So I couldn't accomplish our mission, so there was no sense in us staying.
The Iraqis had been using the disputed sites to test missiles, which they're allowed to do under ceasefire arrangements, as long as the missiles don't exceed 95 miles in range. The cameras the UN wants to install would be a way of keeping the Iraqis honest.
25966.
As this latest standoff involves the UN and not just the United States, any enforcement action would require a UN decision, and there are options, including telling the Iraqis to destroy the sites themselves, or presumably have the UN and its American cruise missiles do it for them. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
Members of Bosnia-Herzegovina's collective presidency appear on the verge of an agreement creating a federation out of the republic. The 7 presidency members, including Bosnian Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, met in Zagreb yesterday and announced the plan. It would set up a federal state, not to be split along ethnic lines as a plan by the Serbs and Croats proposed. The new plan will now be reviewed by UN mediators.
The nearly 700 Chinese immigrants that were intercepted last Wednesday off the coast of the Mexico-California border are still out to sea. The U.S. is apparently attempting to avoid the time and expense of processing the immigrants and is asking Mexico to let the ships dock south of the border. Mexico has refused the original proposal but is reconsidering while the Coast Guard waits for further word from Washington.
And in Britain, a tradition dating back to the 18th century is about to be broken. The Times of London is reporting today some British judges are about to hold court with nothing on their heads. Now, what's so unusual about that, you say? Remember, British judges wear white horsehair wigs in the courtroom. The Times says certain judges will go bald, so to speak, for a time in August as an experiment. This, despite research within the English legal community, which says the wigs should stay. No comment from the judges.
Well, we'll be back after this.
Stay with us. You're watching CBS News, Up to the Minute.
There are some experts who believe alternative energy sources must be found in order to keep man from polluting the planet to death. Some would argue wind power is the solution. Advocates of that energy source say wind farms generate nearly 3 billion kilowatt hours a year. Now that's enough to provide power for a city larger than San Francisco. So how do you get more people to tap into this alternative energy source? That topic is to be discussed at the Wind Power Conference that gets underway today in San Francisco. Mike Marvin is with the American Wind Energy Association, and he joins us now from our CBS affiliate in San Francisco, KPIX TV, to talk about the conference and what the expectations participants have. Mr. Marvin, first of all, thank you very much for joining us on CBS News Up in the Minute.
Nice to be here.
How does this form of wind power work? This is similar to the old windmills that were used to pump water and grind grain. Is that right?
Well, yes. We've obviously come a long way from that technologically, but the basic look is the same, although on a much larger scale. What you see now are wind turbines that are placed generally on towers that are as high as 15 stories. Each of the blades, and usually there are 2 or 3 blades, are longer than a tractor-trailer truck. And each wind turbine has the capacity to generate electricity for between 50 and 100 homes each year. So we have come a long way, but the concept is the same.
Well, it's beautiful. It almost looks like a Christo piece when you look at it. But I'm interested in the savings. How much does wind power cost compared to electricity?
Well, wind power actually is generating electricity, and so the comparison would be to other forms of electricity. The one thing that is clear is that wind power has come a very long way in the last 10 or 15 years, and that's really been the existence of the industry on a large scale. What we find is that wind is now powered at about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now that's by far the least expensive, the least costly form of solar power, and it's actually very cost competitive with coal, one of the largest sources of electricity generation.
Now, we find wind farms in Europe and the Mediterranean. There is a town outside of San Francisco that uses wind power for utility purposes. If wind power is cost effective, Mike, and environmentally friendly, why aren't more cities using it as a resource?
Well, I think what we find is more and more places are using it. The question is, we need to get utilities more involved. and understanding about where the technology is. Again, 10 years ago, this technology was prohibitively expensive and it couldn't quite be relied upon with any great certainty. And so what we have now is really a brand new industry. We've generated 15 billion kilowatt hours in California alone. And it's a question of just making utilities and getting utilities to understand just how far we've come. We're seeing activity in the Pacific Northwest, Washington State. In Minnesota, we're seeing Northern States Power, a utility purchase. In Maine, there was recently a project announced. In Massachusetts. So, no question, the wind technology is here today and clearly will be here tomorrow.
So what is your strategy then? How do you plan to get more cities to use wind power?
Well, I think a strategy is central to the conference that we're having here in San Francisco. What we're looking at here is about 800 people, by far the largest conference in modern wind history. And a lot of those people are coming from cities and from utilities to get a better understanding of the technology of wind, how it exists. But the bottom line is education, making sure that people, utilities, and decision makers and politicians that have to deal with global warming and other environmental issues, make sure that they understand that wind is here today and it's cost effective today.
All right, Mike Marvin with the American Wind Energy Association, thank you very much for joining us on CBS News Up to the Minute.
Thank you.
For other stories making headlines across the country, let's check our CBS News up-to-the-minute news map. African National Congress leader Nelson Mandela is wrapping up his 13-day trip to the United States. On Sunday, he made a series of stops in Atlanta in an effort to raise money for the ANC's preparation for South Africa's first multiracial elections next year. Mandela also made time to lay a wreath on the tomb of assassinated civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. On Saturday, he attended the National Convention of the NAACP in Indianapolis. Mandela was honored with the organization's W.E.B. Du Bois Medal in 1986 for his fight against the oppression of blacks in South Africa. He finally got the chance to accept it this year. Immigration officials in Florida say 62 refugees from the Dominican Republic will be deported. The refugees came ashore at Key Biscayne over the weekend on a 32-foot sailboat. At first, Border Patrol officials arrested 8 people they spotted on the beach. Then they checked the boat and discovered there was enough food for about 50 people. They intensified their search and found the 54 remaining refugees. The refugees reportedly paid up to $25,000 each to get into the country. Also in Atlanta over the weekend, Governor Zell Miller led a pack of bulldozers in the groundbreaking ceremonies for a $209 million Olympic stadium for the '96 Games. Olympic relay teams from area neighborhoods participated in the event. There was one relay team made up of Olympians from Georgia, including former heavyweight boxing champion Evander Holyfield. But near the end of the ceremony, speakers were almost drowned out as protesters demonstrated against what they call their exclusion from the Olympic plan. Home on the range, it's part of American folklore. What do you see when you dream of your home on the range? For some, that is a pointed question. CBS News correspondent Bill Geist explains.
Here in Montana, more buffalo are roaming these days. The deer and the antelope still play, or at least loiter. And they're not the only ones.
Let him out of there.
Cowboys still play too. Indians dance. And if you look closely at the perpetual postcard that is Montana, you even see a few teepees. More than a few, actually. And more new teepee starts every day.
We started out with just a little homemade brochure. The teepees sold themselves.
Don Ellis, a cowboy, not Indian, makes the teepees, and business is booming.
It's just kind of snowballed, just like a snowball.
So when you drive along around in this area of Montana, how many teepees do you suppose you have out in this region?
Oh, I would guess 300-400.
300 or 400, so it's becoming a popular item then.
Yes, they are.
Customers from far and wide now telephone his little company, White Buffalo Lodges in Livingston, Montana, to place their orders. Used to be our interest in the Native American culture didn't extend much beyond rubber tom-toms and beaded belts. But these days, people are snapping up all things Indian, and they prefer them a little more authentic than those made by the Hong Kong tribe. Walt Eisenstein, owner of the Wolf Creek Trading Company. But they're actually becoming somewhat trendy, right?
They are. Jane Fonda's purchased one for Ted Turner for his birthday.
And how much do they cost?
This TP right here in the 12-foot size is about $700.
Don's teepees are now featured in upscale decorating magazines, lavishly furnished. Don, are you a Vogue kind of guy? I mean...
I'm just a Montana country boy.
Teepees are becoming trendy far beyond the Wild West. Are you the first in your neighborhood to have one, or have you seen any others?
I have a feeling we're probably the first in Greenwich to have such a thing.
Stuart and Alicia Orick don't live in the Wild West. They live in the western part of Greenwich, Connecticut.
I thought that there might be some objection to the teepee, but everybody has really liked it, and people came over right away to look at it and suggested a teepee party right away.
How good are Don Ellis's teepees? Ask the Native American who owns one. DeWanda Little Coyote Backbone, a Cheyenne.
We feel that Don Ellis has, in his heart, knows that he respects us, and we respect him for making the teepees. And we own 3 in our family. Well, 4, 1 in the museum. So.
Yes, Don Ellis sells his teepees to the Indians. Don Ellis makes house calls, teepee calls.
They had some high winds in here, and so we come up to correct it.
So in addition to selling them, you do service and maintenance.
Everything.
A full-service teepee dealer. It's all in a day's work for a full-service teepee salesman at a time when what everybody wants is a teepee with a view.
Boy, what a view. Beautiful part of the country. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
This is CBS News, up to the minute. Checking the up-to-minute weather forecast, the storm system that's been hanging over the nation's midsection is slowly moving eastward, but showers are still expected in parts of the Midwest. Thunderstorms will be scattered throughout the Southwest and in the Gulf Coast states. Showers are also expected in the Upper Plains states. The desert Southwest is the nation's hotspot, with temperatures climbing to the century mark. 90-degree weather throughout the Southeast, 80s in parts of the Midwest and the Northeast. Cooler in the Plains states, with forecasts high in the 60s and 70s.
In up-to-the-minute sports, stars were out in many major league ballparks on the last day of play before the '93 All-Star break. Pittsburgh's Andy Van Slyke penciled in a handlebar mustache on Turn Back the Clock Day. Cincinnati's Rob Dibble wasn't amused. He walked in Pittsburgh's winning run in the 9th, the final there 3-2. In New York, the Dodgers' Eric Davis homered off of Dwight Gooden in the top of the 8th to break up a 1-1 tie. The Dodgers won it 2-1. Astro third baseman Kem Caminiti dove to catch a line drive by Chicago's Ryne Sandberg. The Astros were 10-1 winners. In Florida, the Braves' David Justice homered and chased down a fly ball to right with 2 men on to help protect a 6-3 Atlanta win. Over in the American League, Oakland A's shortstop Mike Bordick showed his range while starting a double play, but the Red Sox were 3-2 winners. Boston's Roger Clemens rehabbed his groin muscle at the Sox minor league affiliate in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. He picked off a runner at first and threw 3 2/3 innings of shutout ball. Back in the majors, Kansas City shortstop Greg Gagne hit the turf to open a forced play in a 6-2 win over Detroit. And the Brewers were clinging to a 1-run lead with 2 out in the 9th when right fielder Darrell Hamilton leaped to rob Minnesota's Kirby Puckett. The final in that game, 5-4. Now let's check Sunday's scoreboard.
You are watching CBS News Up to the Minute. Today is Monday, July 12th. It was on this day in history in 1977 that then President Carter took some heat during a press conference for a Supreme Court decision limiting payments for abortions.
And we are trying to make it possible for the people of this nation to understand how to prevent unwanted pregnancies with education programs and with the availability of contraceptives and other devices when they believe in their use as an alternative to abortion. But I don't believe that either states or the federal government should be required to finance abortions. Yes, please.
How fair do you believe it is then that women who can afford to get an abortion can go ahead and have one, and women who cannot afford to are precluded from doing so?
Well, as you know, there are many things in life that are not fair, that wealthy people can afford and poor people can't. But I don't believe that the federal government should take action to try to make these opportunities exactly equal.
Mr. Carter defended the decision even though it contradicted his position while campaigning before taking office earlier that year.
President Carter's vice president, Walter Mondale, made some history on this day in 1984, just 1 week before he would be nominated as the Democratic presidential candidate. New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro became the first woman chosen as a running mate.
These last few hours, I've got to tell you, I've been on the phone talking with friends and supporters around the country. There's an electricity in the air, an excitement, a sense of new possibilities, and of pride. My good friend Charlie Rangel, the congressman from Harlem, said to me, "Jerry, my heart is full. So is mine." Fritz Mondale knows what America is really about, and I'm honored to join him in this campaign for the future. Thank you.
Mondale and Ferraro would lose in November of that year to Ronald Reagan and George Bush.
That's it for this half hour.
Thanks for watching. This is CBS News, Up to the Minute. Boris Yeltsin returned to Russia over the weekend, carrying promises of more Western help. Yeltsin hopes those promises from the G7 leaders in Tokyo will seal a major victory during a renewed session of the Constitutional Assembly. The 700-member assembly is now working on a new constitution that Yeltsin hopes will give him more power. Joining us from Moscow is Princeton University professor and CBS News consultant Steve Cohen. Hello, Steve. How are you?
Hello, Monica. Hello, I'm okay.
Good. Let me ask you, first of all, what is the Russian take on the success of the G7 summit? Is it believed that that Boris Yeltsin was able to bring back some added strength?
You know, Monica, the really amazing thing here is that there's very little attention paid to this summit. 5-6 years ago, it would have swept the entire Russian press. It would have been the lead story. Now it's buried here. I think there are two reasons. First of all, the American card, as it's called sometime, has more or less exhausted itself. People have lost interest in the subject. Secondly, the problems inside this country are so great that people no longer think there are any solutions outside the country.
What about the $3 billion privatization fund? Now, that sounds like a lot of money to most folks, but is it believed there that it's really going to do anything to help the reforms?
I can't even count that high. $3 million is a fortune. But on the other hand, it's just barely going to dent the kind of problems they have here. The thing to remember is that market reforms here have barely begun. If there's a real journey to the market, if there's real privatization, it means they're going to have to close down enormous factories. And those factories are not just manufacturing buildings. Those are entire cities. The old state factories supported the school system. They built the housing. They financed the municipal services. Nobody here knows what will happen to dozens of large towns with maybe 500,000, 1 million people, men, women, and children, if these factories close down, or even if they're privatized, because who's going to pay this money? So if this country really goes in the direction of Western-style market reform, the journey has only begun, the pain has only begun, and $3 billion is it's a Band-Aid.
Speaking of pain, Boris Yeltsin has asked the Constitutional Assembly to bypass Parliament and come up with a new constitution. Let me ask you, first of all, what's happening on that front? What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that over there, behind me, they're beginning to meet for what Yeltsin has said will be the last of several meetings of this Constitutional Assembly. You're absolutely right, Monica. He gathered this body in an attempt to run around the Parliament, which does not want his Constitution. The problem is that the people who make up, the 700 people who make up this Constitutional Assembly are the power brokers from the localities of this country, from the provinces, from the regions. And these people want to take power from Moscow for themselves. And the fear here in Moscow is that if Yeltsin gives these local powers too much power, that the Russian state will break up. So Yeltsin is in a real vice, and we'll see later today or by tomorrow whether he's prepared to give away so much to get his constitution that he would endanger the Russian state. It's a real danger.
Aside from some strong arm tactics, though, what options does he have open to him at this point?
Well, it's hard to imagine. Let's say, for example, that they agree today on a draft of a new constitution. How do you get it passed into law? The Parliament won't pass it. If you go to the people, it's unlikely you could get the 51% the law requires. So it's not clear at all, apart from strong-arm tactics, as you say, Monica, that there's a solution to his problem. There's a growing fear here in Moscow that we've come to another political dead end.
Steve, we're hearing that there is quite a bit of attention being paid to the squabbling, if you can call it that, between Russia and the Ukraine. Tell us what you can about that situation. How significant is it in the big picture?
I think it's terribly significant. What used to be Cold War from the Soviet Union has now given way, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, to hot wars all across the territories of the former Soviet Union. But by far the most dangerous potential military conflict is between Russia and Ukraine, two nuclear giants, and at the moment you have the sailors and the officers and the admirals of the Black Sea Fleet refusing to obey the orders, the political decisions of both the Ukrainian president and the Russian president. This is a terribly dangerous situation.
All right. Steve Cohen, CBS News consultant in Moscow. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Goodbye, Monica.
In up-to-the-minute sports, Lance Armstrong became the 5th American to win a stage in the Tour de France. Armstrong, just 21 years old, won a sprint to the finish in Verdun at the end of the 114-mile 8th stage. Armstrong edged Spain's Raul Alcala at the finish. Armstrong is 12th overall, 2 minutes 32 seconds behind a rider from Belgium. The Celebrity Golf Tour stopped near Lake Tahoe, where Globetrotter Curly Neal showed Charles Barkley an old trick. Former baseball pitcher Rick Rhoden finished at 9 under par and won his second straight tour event. Rhoden earned $75,000. Now let's check Sunday's scoreboard.
If you listen to Hollywood, only men go fly fishing. Take, for example, the film A River Runs Through It. It's the zen of fly fishing, but from a very male perspective, no women allowed. Fortunately, that is not how it is in real life. Brian Wood reports from Washington State.
Faith Holste and friends work for Steelhead on this slow bend in the Stillaguamish.
Did you just have something, Mary?
Faith is president of the Northwest Women Fly Fishers, a club for and about fly fisher women.
It's real non-threatening for a beginner to come into our group and say, I want to learn about fly fishing.
Sean Hubbard joined the group last October.
Well, because my boyfriend introduced me to fly fishing, and it's frustrating fishing with men, with boys.
Oh!
Because they're so impatient, sorry. But he was so impatient.
And patience is aplenty in this group, especially teaching newcomers how to fly fish.
You may even want to come back up a little this way and try to cast more under that tree, that leaning tree. Get a better angle on it.
The club also raises thousands of dollars for conservation projects. In 5 years, Northwest Women Fly Fishers has grown from 18 members to more than 100. But acceptance comes not so much with words, but with actions. Like last winter on a male-dominated stretch of river when Mary Smiley caught a 15-pound steelhead.
I think they were amazed. I think they were appalled. Not only that women could fish, but that they knew what they were doing and could fly fish and outfish them because they weren't doing any good.
Now, but don't be mistaken, this is not an anti-men group. This is definitely a pro-fly fishing group. After all, as Sean Hubbard says...
Oh, no, the fish don't care what sex is on the other end of the line. No.
Brian Wood for CBS News.
You gonna get your pole now?
I'm ready to go. It looks so peaceful out there. I'd like to be there right now. That does it for this half hour. Thanks for being with us.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
Straight ahead on CBS News, up to the minute, irony along the Mississippi. With water all around, people in Des Moines are doing without as the muddy Mississippi surrounds the city, contaminating supplies.
And President Clinton back on American soil and bolstering his image as Commander-in-Chief of the nation's armed forces.
Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Monica Gale.
And I'm Troy Roberts.
Des Moines is a city flooded by the rising waters of the Mississippi, but this morning there will be long lines for the water that has been causing so much misery.
Governor Terry Branstad is doubling the number of National Guard troops and has recruited the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to haul drinking water to a city of 250,000 people. Mississippi River water has polluted the city's water supply. Now a city awash by the floods is importing even more water. Reporter Scott Reynolds has more.
All the flooding of the farmland to the north finally took its toll on the state's biggest city as well. The raging Raccoon River busted a levee in West Des Moines and blasted past its banks.
We're just going to unload. We're just going to drop it. That's right.
A monumental effort by volunteers saved the West Des Moines water treatment plant, preserving a clean supply of water for hospitals in downtown Des Moines, where the water is contaminated. Nearby cities have brought in thousands of gallons of drinking water. You had to wait in line to get yours. At least 45,000 residents have lost their electricity, and many know they'll lose their homes.
It's like losing a child or your husband or something. You're gonna, the thought of losing what we've built, it's just unbelievable.
We're moving everything completely out of our house, the whole thing, everything, because we might not be able to come back.
While some managed to save their belongings, others didn't get enough warning to drive away. The kind of flooding many believe would only hit once in 100 years had arrived. Most of the Metro buses made it to higher ground, but none of them will run their routes tomorrow. And nobody will be running the bases at the minor league stadium anytime soon. Some didn't want to wait for the waters to recede to assess the damage. Others couldn't even get together on this Sunday to pray that the rains will stop.
Many downtown businesses will be closed today, although the state offices will remain open, and the National Guard will continue to bring in fresh drinking water for about 250,000 residents who have a contaminated water supply in Des Moines right now. Famous federal officials have been visiting the Midwest over the past couple of weeks to assess flood damage, and Iowa gets its visit later today from Vice President Al Gore. But he will witness an incredible amount of damage that wasn't here just a couple of days ago when he scheduled his visit. For CBS News, I'm Scott Reynolds.
In the east, the unrelenting heat is being blamed for as many as 48 deaths, including at least 41 in Philadelphia alone. Most of the victims were elderly people who lived alone in upper-floor apartments without air conditioning. Some weather forecasters in the east are predicting cooler temperatures may be on the way by midweek.
Another city is reportedly suffering a slow death plagued by a lack of water and electricity. Not along the Mississippi, but in Sarajevo. People in that city, pounded by over a year of war, collect water from nearby streams to drink. UN forces there say they've tried on 3 occasions to repair the city's utilities, but have come under fire each time. U.S. troops are leaving Germany this morning, heading for Macedonia. The deployment was ordered by President Clinton to prevent the spread of war from other parts of the former Yugoslavia. The American troops will be the first U.S. ground combat unit deployed in the Balkans. UN officials admit the troops are no serious deterrent, but say the forces act as a tripwire that may draw more troops if an attack occurs.
UN weapons inspectors packed up and left Baghdad on Sunday. That after Iraq barred the team from sealing missile test sites. The UN team tried to gain access to the sites but were confronted by Iraqi organized demonstrators. The inspection team had instructions to put seals on the missile sites after the Iraqis had refused to allow monitoring equipment to be installed. Vice President Al Gore says the UN resolutions will be complied with, quote, one way or another.
President Clinton ended a Sunday that ranged from staring down the sole remaining Cold War aggressor to walking the warm sands of Waikiki. The president is back on American soil after his Asian tour. Reporter Mark Knoller has more from Hawaii.
As Air Force One landed in Hawaii on Sunday, it must have seemed to President Clinton like the day that would not end. The old adage that there are only 24 hours in a day just did not apply. With the help of the International Dateline, he was getting a double dose of Sunday.
Our armed forces must still be able to fight and win on a moment's notice.
It began in South Korea, where Mr. Clinton went deeper into the demilitarized zone than any American president. He visited a guard post surrounded on 3 sides by North Korea and looked through field glasses, once he got the lens caps off, into the north. And he thanked some of the 36,000 American troops in South Korea. He said they perform a vital function. And then, as if to say thanks, he performed for them. Then it was Sunday all over again in Hawaii. A second Sunday breakfast, this one with sailors at Pearl Harbor. A brief trip on a launch to the Arizona Memorial, his first there as president. A chance to reflect on the lessons of World War II, having just come from the Tokyo summit, where he conferred congenially with the leaders of Japan and Germany, among others.
Our closest friends now are those with whom we fought a half a century ago.
Later in the day, Mr. Clinton got another chance to reflect on his first big overseas trip. Addressing more than 10,000 people on the shores of Waikiki, he trumpeted what he sees as the major achievements of the trip, including the $3 billion aid package for Russia negotiated at the Tokyo summit.
There is a direct connection, as the people of Hawaii know, as well as any people in America, between how well America does and how well the rest of the world does.
The speech on the beach is Mr. Clinton's only public appearance while in Hawaii. The next 3 days are intended for unabashed rest and relaxation, his first presidential vacation. But White House aides worry privately that with devastating floods in the Midwest, this vacation may carry a political price. Mark Knoller, CBS News, Honolulu.
The chairman of the Senate Finance Committee says the energy tax is dead. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan predicts a compromise with the House on President Clinton's economic package, but he says it may push the proposed gasoline tax up a few cents and may add an electricity surcharge.
The head of the nation's largest civil rights organization is planning for the future of the NAACP. Benjamin Chavez announced plans to raise at least $100 million to ensure the long-term financial security of the group. Chavez, speaking at the NAACP convention in Indianapolis, said the fund will be named for the late black entrepreneur Reginald F. Lewis.
A New York document expert says he's found a lost play by William Shakespeare. According to Newsweek, the play, entitled Cardenio, was reportedly found in the British Museum. The play was co-written by Shakespeare in 1612, but was never produced and presumed lost. Handwriting samples apparently authenticate the find, but scholars say the drama is not up to Shakespeare's standards.
Still ahead on CBS Up to the Minute, the first family is on the Big Island for a rest.
But it will be something of a working vacation for the First Lady. Hawaii is ahead of the wave for universal medical coverage. Stay with us.
President Clinton is relaxing in Hawaii this morning, but the president is combining business with pleasure on this vacation stopover in Honolulu. Making several public appearances, Bill Clinton seemed to be briefing the nation on his trip to Asia and the work he accomplished.
It is wonderful to be home after my first trip overseas as your president. I went to Asia to a meeting of the world's 7 great industrial nations. I also went to meet in Japan and Korea, and here today in Hawaii with the people who are in charge of the national security interest of the United States in Asia and the Pacific region. This morning, I ended that trip with a visit to the Arizona Memorial and a briefing by the Commander-in-Chief of our forces in the Pacific and his senior officers. As Hillary said yesterday, we were in Korea, along the demilitarized zone. And I walked out further than any American president ever had onto the bridge of no return, about 10 yards from the line separating South and North Korea. And with my binoculars, I looked into the other side and I saw some young North Korean soldiers looking back at me, and I thought to myself, I wish you could walk over this bridge, and I hope it won't be long until you can, until we put down the threat of nuclear war and open up the handship and the friendship. The other thing I did on this trip was to worry about what I could do abroad to help our economy here at home. There is a direct connection, as the people of Hawaii know, as well as any people in America, between how well America does and how well the rest of the world does. We have been in a period of slow economic growth with great problems in creating new jobs and raising incomes. But I went to Japan, which is having its lowest period of economic performance in 20 years, to meet with leaders from Europe, where every nation has a higher unemployment rate than we do, and many countries are in their lowest period of economic performance in 30 or 40 years. There is a global economic slowdown, and we have to turn it around to open opportunities for Americans. We are building new partnerships with people in their private capacities. Something I did as president when I was overseas was to meet with over 350 Americans representing business interests in Japan, and then meeting with the executive board of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea to talk about what we could do together to create opportunities for American businesses and American workers. And we are making some progress. We have interest rates at a 20-year low, millions of people refinancing their homes and their business loans, almost 1 million new jobs in the American economy since January. That compares with only 1 million new jobs in 3 years before then. We are making some progress, but we've got a long way to go.
From world leader to dad, Bill Clinton strolled along the beach with his daughter Chelsea and her friends Sunday afternoon. The president will wrap up his vacation Wednesday, arriving back in Washington Thursday morning.
First Lady Hillary Clinton will put in some work time during the family vacation in Hawaii, hosting a forum on health care. Hawaii is at the forefront in providing universal medical coverage. CBS News correspondent Bill Lagatuda reports.
If anything happens to me, I don't have to worry about the cost of the medical care. I'm covered. Worst case scenario, I'm covered.
When it comes to health care, Christopher Schlarb, a crewman on a catamaran, doesn't have to worry. Like 98% of the citizens of Hawaii, he is fully insured. That's because in the state, employers are required to give complete health coverage to their workers.
What we've done better is we have more primary care, more prevention, and we've given everybody access.
Take a deep breath in. The theory is by giving almost everyone full care, costs are spread out and problems are treated early before they become expensive. Important for the parents of a sick child, for example.
If you don't have any coverage, you've got to pay cash, so you're kind of limited. You know, you kind of hesitate, should I go in or not? Should I take them in?
Because healthcare is accessible, you don't wait to have crisis-oriented, wait until it's really too far gone before you see a doctor or seek medical help.
It may sound like paradise, but even along these shores, there is disagreement. Exploding healthcare costs are driving insurance premiums higher even here, and some small business owners say their revenues can't keep up. Since state law requires companies to contribute for all who work at least 20 hours a week, Some businesses are now limiting their workers to 19 hours.
That way I can have people helping me without getting into a large expense.
Dr. Richard Frankel sees other gaps. Though the state offers low-cost insurance for the unemployed or those who work fewer than 20 hours, not all can afford that and may continue to postpone treatment.
If you happen to have a child who is critically ill or dies or requires a few weeks in the hospital, you can't take comfort in the fact that overall the state's doing well.
Overall, the state is doing well. Its residents are among the nation's healthiest, while its health care costs are the lowest. But many are not sure the Hawaiian experience will work elsewhere.
It's a unique community. It is almost a foreign country in some ways. And so I don't know that we are a good example for the rest of the mainland.
On the mainland, there are 36 million Americans without health insurance, something that's just not a worry to Hawaiians like Christopher Schlar.
I can continue with my lifestyle, doing the things I like to do, without worrying about breaking a bone or getting sick or cutting my head or something.
The administration's much-delayed health care reform package is not expected to be unveiled until September, after Congress finishes work on the budget. Bill Agatuto, CBS News, New York.
We'll be back in just a moment.
This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
Now let's check Sunday's scoreboard.
Now on CBS News Up to the Minute, trying to keep a piece of history from washing away. And women playing power politics. We'll have the latest from Los Angeles. Good morning. It is Monday, July 12th, and from CBS News in New York, this is Up to the Minute. I'm Troy Roberts. Monica Gale will join me in a moment. Forecasters say Mother Nature will finally take a break this week. It's expected to stop raining in the Midwest and start raining in the east. In Des Moines, Iowa, residents have two headaches this morning: no power and no water, drinking water, that is. Flooding there has inundated a power plant. It has also knocked out the city's water treatment facility, contaminating water supplies to 250,000 people. City officials say it could take a month to restore clean drinking water. For now, bottled water is being trucked in. Flood waters are expected to crest in St. Louis later this week, and later today, Vice President Al Gore plans to visit the St. Louis area. He says the administration is looking at a possible overhaul of the entire government disaster response system.
Farmers often find in the wake of disasters that the loans are a mixed blessing. They help in the short term, but they leave a residue of debt, obviously, and some farmers find that difficult to deal with. We're looking at an overhaul of the whole disaster response program of the federal government.
Yesterday, the White House extended federal relief to 44 more counties in Missouri. Gore says the government will continue to respond even if the expense adds to the federal deficit. All along the Mississippi, more than 30,000 people have been forced from their homes, 18 people killed by the floodwaters. Many historic areas have been all but washed away. CBS News correspondent Terrence Smith is in one of those areas where residents are waiting and hoping for the best.
Hannibal, Missouri, the literary hometown of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, where life on the Mississippi has become a race against the rising river.
One more time, man. One more. Let's hear that boatload.
These men have been working around the clock for 9 days to salvage their plant and their jobs.
Until you've actually experienced having to save your livelihood, you don't know what it's about.
Hannibal's historic and business districts are protected by an $8 million levee completed just last month. But even the new wall is only inches higher than the 31.5-foot crest that is predicted for Tuesday.
It's very close. It's very close.
John Hark is Hannibal's emergency management director.
There's no levees. There's nothing else that is actually going to control the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, or anything else.
When author Mark Twain lived here in the 19th century, Hannibal had no flood wall, but no great floods either. Many believe it is the levees themselves, built largely since then, that set the stage for disasters like the flood of '93.
Yeah, I've lived along the river just about all my life, and I've never seen anything like this.
George Arch and his family live south of Hannibal's levee, where the water has already taken over. After 16 years, he's had enough.
Well, I'd like to get out. You know, if they offer me anything, I'm going to take it and run.
While Hannibal waits for the crest, the ball field where Shoeless Joe Jackson played and Tom Sawyer's Creek have become tourist attractions of another kind. Terrence Smith, CBS News, Hannibal, Missouri.
The oppressive heat on the East Coast is now blamed for more than 48 deaths. In Philadelphia alone, officials say at least 41 people have died of heat-related causes. Many were senior citizens living without air conditioning. Deaths were also reported in New York, New Jersey, and New Hampshire. It was a bit cooler along the Atlantic on Sunday in the double-digit 90s instead of 100+. President Clinton and his family are basking in Hawaiian sunshine, but it's a working vacation. Mrs. Clinton plans to host a forum on health care, and she says she plans to visit areas struck by Hurricane Iniki last fall. The president told Hawaiians he has signed a bill to provide them with $48 million in extra emergency assistance. The Clintons arrived yesterday after an all-night flight from Seoul. They were greeted by daughter Chelsea in Honolulu and then headed for Pearl Harbor. There, they laid a wreath at the USS Arizona Memorial and tossed leis in the water in honor of those who died in the Japanese attack in 1941. Before heading to Hawaii, the president visited the Korean border yesterday, talking with U.S. soldiers at the demilitarized zone and checking out the north. Now, one day later, North Korea says it has turned over the U.S. the remains of 17 American soldiers killed in the Korean War. The move is seen as a goodwill gesture to the president. There is apparently no such goodwill coming out of Vietnam. That, according to the latest U.S. delegation that has just wrapped up a visit to Southeast Asia. Rick Fredrickson has that story.
It was a haunting trip back for Robert Garwood, a disgraced former Marine POW who was court-martialed for collaborating with the enemy after his return home in 1979. He joined Senator Bob Smith, a longtime activist on the MIA issue, who praised Vietnam's cooperation but wants more proof.
Our job now is to use Mr. Garwood as a resource. He's an American who says he saw living Americans, or believes he saw living Americans here at sometime between 73 and 79. The Vietnamese people and their government have allowed us to go where he said he saw them. I couldn't be more pleased than that in terms of cooperation.
Garwood led the delegation from the streets of Hanoi to a remote peninsula where he claims to have seen numerous Americans in captivity long after the war ended. His information turned out to be accurate enough to convince Senator Smith. The Vietnamese tried to discredit Garwood. They welcomed him as an old friend.
I was a prisoner for 14 years. You got it? Bobby. Never your friend. I wasn't then, I'm not now.
The Americans looked into 7 live sighting reports, and Smith said he was more convinced than ever that prisoners were left behind. At news conferences in Vietnam and here in Thailand, he slammed what he called sloppy work by U.S. military investigators who had previously checked out and discounted the Garwood accounts. An angry Senator Smith says the process must be changed. Rick Fredrickson, CBS News, Bangkok.
No details yet, but there is word from a PLO official in Cairo this morning that meetings between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization have taken place. Israel does not recognize the PLO. The 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council will meet later today to talk about the latest confrontation with Baghdad. The meeting comes one day after a team of UN weapons inspectors abruptly left the country. The inspectors have been barred from sealing off 2 missile sites. Iraq fired off a letter to the Security Council accusing the inspectors of creating pretext for a military strike. In fact, Iraqis appear prepared for another U.S. strike. Many spent this morning stocking up on supplies and holed up at home. Elsewhere around the world this morning, little movement to begin the business week. At mid-morning in London, the FT 100 was down nearly 7 points. Japan's Nikkei index rose 0.5% today, 102 points. That followed a 6 2/3 point gain for the Dow Industrials. On Wall Street, the Dow opens today at 35.21. And back in London, gold opened today at $393.70 an ounce, up $2.10 for the New York spot close. 1993 may well become the year of the woman in American politics that 1992 never was. Women in and out of political office spent the weekend in Los Angeles. CBS News correspondent Sandra Hughes reports.
Janet Reno.
Attorney General Janet Reno came to the National Women's Political Caucus a symbol of the strides made by women in government, a role model for the women who aspire to public office.
No one should hold on to a job or to seek an office that they care more about than doing the right thing.
After Anita Hill galvanized the movement in 1991, women took Washington by storm, doubling their numbers in the Senate and greatly increasing their presence in the House. But many pundits wonder if the momentum can continue. The NWPC is optimistic but realistic.
A little sobering news. 1994 is going to be a tougher year for women candidates than 1992.
Nearly 1,000 candidates and supporters, Republican and Democrat, spent 3 days preparing themselves for that challenge and defined their goal for 1994. The year of the woman governor. At this point, at least 27 women are considering a gubernatorial race.
And I think voters are tired of the old backroom politics. They recognize that women are different, our priorities tend to be different, but also the way we govern is different.
These women are out to prove the successes of 1992 weren't a fluke. And by winning elections at the local level, they're one step closer to the ultimate goal. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Los Angeles.
In a moment, the Midwest floods, wet weather that's plaguing man and beasts. Although we're told the kitten was saved. The effects of what is now being called the Great Flood of '93 stretch from Minnesota south to Missouri and Illinois this morning. At the center of it all this morning, hundreds of miles north and west of the mighty Mississippi River, sits the town of Des Moines, Iowa. Our affiliate KCCI-TV is without water and operating with generator-provided electricity. Here is a portion of their late local news from last night.
Next on tonight's TV8 News, the flood of 1993 is going into the record book.
West Des Moines is one of the hardest hit areas, but downtown Des Moines also suffering from the worst flood ever. And 250,000 people are without water and will be for at least 1 week.
Connie will tell us whether the rain will continue, and John Walters with damage to Sac Taylor Stadium in Des Moines and the day's sports. TV8 News is next.
You're watching today's TV8. And this is News Now. This is TV8 News.
Sac Taylor Stadium in Des Moines is an island tonight, surrounded by floodwaters, a snapshot of record flooding that has essentially shut down downtown Des Moines and caused tens of millions in damage.
And central Iowa residents now lining up for drinking water, and late word tonight says you may not be able to drink tap water in Des Moines for surrounding communities for 1 month. Good evening. Thanks for being with us. I'm Sarah Jarvis.
And I'm Steve Oswald. In the next few minutes, we'll be telling you where you can call for flood help and where you can go to get water if yours is shut off.
And we'll tell you how long your electricity is going to be off if you're one of the thousands who have that problem. And we'll bring you up to date on road closings. First, our headlines. Downtown workers are being asked not to show up for work tomorrow unless specifically called by their employer, and they're asked to be there. Now, water and electricity in the Des Moines metro area for hundreds of thousands of residents will be lost for a week, and even then, the water may not be drinkable for a month. More than 1,400 Iowa National Guard troops are now on duty, helping out wherever they can. Now, Iowa Power spokesman David Weiss tells TV8 News tonight that 30,000 to 35,000 customers are still without power at this hour, and that's not likely to change for a while. Those customers are mainly in the downtown Des Moines area and neighborhoods close by. Weiss says 4 Midwest Power substations remain at least partially underwater at this hour. And Weiss also says that some areas can expect to experience what he calls rolling power interruptions tomorrow as utility officers work to keep their patchwork system in place. Now, Midwest Power is asking customers who do have power to limit their electrical use. Weiss also says a few West Des Moines residents may also be without power, and he says
those customers in West Des Moines aren't likely to get their power back anytime soon.
And finally, now here is the area in the Des Moines Metro without water tonight. About 250,000 people are without water service. They may be without water for up to 7 days, perhaps even longer. The Des Moines Water Works serves these customers. It had to shut down when the water covered the treatment plant in Des Moines earlier today.
Now, within the past hour, TV8's Sue Mason caught up with Waterworks Director L.D. McMullen. He says the water could be back in 7 days, but it may not be fit to drink.
I think after 7 days, there probably will still be a precaution saying that you should boil the water for two minutes and before drinking it. But if we get real lucky, we might be able to shorten up that all clear signal.
What's it going to take to be real lucky?
Well, if we would get real fortunate and find out that a lot of our tanks did not get contaminated with the river water when it overflowed the levee, which is very possible because they were full of water. And if they did not get contaminated, then the cleanup is going to go a lot faster than we thought.
And McMullen says the waterworks will airlift sandbags into the flooded area tomorrow to begin a massive cleanup. Now, our live coverage continues tonight with that most urgent problem, drinking water.
And tonight, a massive effort is underway to ship in water to Des Moines and suburbs that use the waterworks. TV8's Martin Augustine is live at one of the distribution sites, the Hy-Vee parking lot at 2540 East Euclid. And Martin, how busy has it been there tonight?
Well, it's been very busy here all day and everywhere after distribution sites were announced. Let's take a better look at what's happening here today. The truck that's pulled up right here, the driver tells us that about 30,000 gallons of water has been delivered here to the Hy-Vee today, and more will be coming tonight. There's 6 trucks like these operating in conjunction with the National Guard, and there are more trucks on the way coming from Kansas City. This particular truck is from Altoona. I'm told the Altoona Fire Department just dumped a bunch of water in there. Now, it's important to point out there's going to be plenty of water for everyone, but you need to conserve your water. Officials want people to take only about 2 gallons per person. Now, a few people have started to line up here for the water. There are several lines with the additional National Guard tank. It's not going to take that long to get through this particular water line. Now, it's also another thing we need to note is these trucks are going to be here and at other distribution sites as long as you need them. If people stop coming, they're probably going to go home. I don't think that's going to happen. As long as there's a trickle of people here, they're going to be here for you.
Okay, Martin, so they will be going all night if people want to still stop by at this late hour?
If people want to stop by, into the early hours, the trucks are going to be here. If you need water, they're going to have it for you.
Okay.
All right, Martin Augustine reporting live. Thank you. The key message tonight, of course, is this: water is available.
West Des Moines and all over the cities, there are personal stories on how people have been affected by these floodwaters.
Now, TV8's Sue Mason is joining us live from near the Des Moines River. Sue, what's going on?
Well, we're in the area of 2nd and University, where streets are absolutely flooded from the overflowing sewer systems and, of course, from the overflowing Des Moines River. And that's, of course, flooding out several businesses in this area as well. It's definitely a frustrating situation for everyone involved, as you know. But people are being patient for the most part.
Hold on to that jug.
They stood in line, clutching their empty containers. Des Moines area residents waiting to pick up water that was safe to drink. This site at Merle Hay Road in Aurora is one of several water distribution sites in Des Moines.
I think we take a lot for granted. And we watch on the news things like Sarajevo and think, my, how unfortunate those people are. And they've been going through that for a year, and we're going to have to go through it for a week.
Many people tried to make the best of a frustrating situation. Some say it was a great way to meet new people in the city.
I've got nice people around me, and we've got water. Crazy. I've never seen anything like it before, and I've lived here for 42 years.
You can't really believe. It's like losing a child or your husband or something. The thought of losing what we've built is just unbelievable. We just think God can't do that to us.
Being forced out of your home, like we just heard from Diana Losi, has to be just a helpless feeling. I know there are a lot of people who care for these people, and they have a lot of feelings going out there. We'll toss it back to you.
Well, Sue, a lot of emotional stories out there. Are you finding that people are surprised by the community effort, or is this something they expected?
I don't think people are really surprised. I think they knew it would be there, but it's really nice to hear it, especially when I was talking to Diana. She said, you know, it's great to have friends.
Thanks a lot. Sue Mason reporting live from downtown Des Moines.
Well, you may need a little help getting up a little earlier than usual tomorrow so you can find an alternative route to get to work. The good news is the Interstates 80 and 35 are back open throughout the Des Moines metro area, but some other major streets are closed that may block your way.
The weather forecast for the Des Moines area is good today, but more rain is expected later in the week. Now let's take a look at the scoreboard.